So for continuing education credit, if you're seeking to obtain credits, please follow the instructions. One, by updating your full name to your nameplate here in Zoom, so your first and last name to obtain credit. So please update first and last name to obtain credit. We'll also put these instructions in the chat as a link to a PDF. Justina, Dr. Bridges, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me see where I am. Okay, well, welcome again. As Danielle said, so this is our community conversation. This is part of our Turning the Page Anti-Racism Book Club that we have every second Tuesday of the month at noon. And please come back and join us. We are usually discussing a book, and we'll discuss one book over 4 months. So we'll discuss 2 books this next year. And hey, whether or not you have read, you can please join us. Today we're going to be we're doing a little bit different. Like Danielle said, we'll be watching the Emmy award-winning documentary, The Land of Opportunity. And then we have 2 of the filmmakers joining us today. So we'll talk to them a little bit after we watch the video. And I just want to thank the Office of International Programming and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion always for sponsoring this, and a special thank you to Danielle Binion, our Director of DEI, for inviting the speakers and making this all happen. So thank you, Danielle. As always, I like to show this. Why do we come together in this book club? The purpose is for all of us to understand the history, patterns, and systems of racism that have been throughout our history as a country, and specifically a place to practice talking about racism and racial disparities. This is in particular a place for personal growth. We hope that usually we'll break out into breakout rooms and kind of have some practice discussing books and stuff. We won't do breakout rooms today. We'll just have one big conversation, but we like to highlight the personal learning and growth in this space, and emotions may be provoked. So, and it's just important to recognize whether it's discomfort, empathy, outrage, whatever it is. The goal is to raise our consciousness together, and with ultimately the goal to commit to action and systems change. So thank you for being here. I'm just going to very briefly speak before we show the video, but I just want to remind all of us, I've shown this a few times lately, but why do we at an academic medical center want to understand racism, the past and present, how it impacts health? And that's because, all of these things that we've gotten really good in the last couple decades talking about, the social determinants of health or the structural determinants of health, are all impacted by racism and other forms of oppression that you can see on the left side. So all of these items in blue are sort of the mediators, and they make your health good or they can make your health bad. And then I've added this great figure comes from the Boston Public Health Commission's Racial Justice and Health Equity Initiative. And then I added 2 items directly, sort of the direct line from racism that can affect your health, which is the stress that takes, the toll of stress that takes on a body over a lifetime of everyday racism and structural racism, and all of it adding together, as well as personal bias that can be encountered in a clinical setting. So that's kind of a reminder. We have, over the last 2 months, many of you were here for the last 2 sessions, we talked about the color of law, which talks a lot about the similar topic as we're going to see in the video today. But this is going to give us a chance to really look more closely at our city. And so this I showed last time that we met too. And these are data from the 2019 Equality Index State of Black Kansas City from UMKC. and some other collaborators. And this is just a reminder that look at some of the homeownership, poverty, and wealth disparities that exist in our city between, Black Kansas Cityans and white Kansas Cityans. So you can see a deficit in home ownership, much higher poverty rate for Black Kansas Cityans. And then really, I feel like this is the most striking, is to look at the wealth gap, that it's, a tenth of the amount for Black homes versus white households. And a lot of that really was driven by whose grandparents and great grandparents were able to buy homes in neighborhoods, that had value. So we're going to now turn our attention to the Emmy Award winning. Okay. Thank you so much. We are joined by Nicholas Wiggins and Nathaniel Bozarth. And I just want to say thank you. I don't know if people want to clap, or you can show a little icon. I don't know how you do this on Zoom. But that was amazing. I've watched it a couple of times, and I just hear something different and learn something new each time I watch it. Let me just tell you a little bit about our guests, and then we'll ask them some questions. So Nicholas Wiggins is the founder and executive producer at Nico Giles Media. As an Emmy award-winning filmmaker, Nico is committed to amplifying issues of social justice, equity, and race. Beginning his career in education, he launched 2 programs at Kansas State University targeting retention and graduation of underrepresented students. Since entering the world of media, his films have covered topics from education, inequality, social movements, the world of sports, real estate development, and the evolution of music genres. Nathaniel Bozarth is an Emmy award-winning storyteller, public historian, and data scientist specializing in work centering around the history of residential segregation and the personal work of racial justice. Nathaniel's anti-racist work includes a podcast, Wide Ruled, on the past and present of equality in education, and 2 documentary series about how various identities affect one's access to the American dream, Your Fellow Americans and Redream. In 2018, Nathaniel co-created an app-based tour, The Dividing Lines, the history of segregation in KC. We listened to a clip of that, and I think many of us have listened to or gone on the whole tour. A virtual home version of the tour was released in 2021, and Nathaniel produces and advises on a wide range of projects and curriculum illuminating the past and present of systemic racism. So thank you. We're so glad that you are here to talk with us. I just wanted to give you both a couple of minutes to tell us anything else you would like us to know about yourselves, maybe what you're working on now. Nico, would you like to start? And I will stop sharing so we can all see each other.
No, that's okay. I won't get into too much happening now. I would love to just hear feedback about the project, and I just want to congratulate Nathaniel again. The man is worth his salt. He's an incredible researcher and found a lot of the material that really helped the story make sense. But no, I'm excited to just hear feedback and really appreciative of the opportunity to just engage in the work.
Great, thank you for being here. Nathaniel, did you want to add? Do you want to congratulate Nico on how amazing he is?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt so honored throughout just getting asked to work with Nico on this project and be a part of it is an honor. I think one thing that I would love to say that I thought was so cool is that before Land of Opportunity, I had been a part of a variety of projects where we talked about the history of segregation, and we talked about systemic racism and justice and injustice. And something that was a huge lesson and takeaway and learning for me working with and for Nico on this project was, how do I say this? So I'm a white guy. I come at stories about racial justice with the perspective of look at all the ways that that I have and people who look at me have created and effed up this system. Apologies. But being on Land of Opportunity with Nico, something that was so cool was that instead of being a conversation, a documentary that's just about look how bad things are or were, it's a story of triumph and courage and beauty. And I feel so honored to have been I just learned, like, that was totally like learning a different way to tell that story in a way that elevates the power of Black people historically and presently. And that was really beautiful for me. And have loads of gratitude for getting to learn that, getting to be a part of that.
Well said. So I gathered a few questions ahead of time from some others, and so I'll share those. And then if anyone wants to, I'll try to keep an eye on, see if I can see everyone. If you want to put a little hand raise up, I'll call on you. So I was actually going to ask both of you, and maybe you kind of already mentioned this, Nathaniel, but just some key moments during your work that kind of made you really change your perspective, or that maybe surprised you. So if either of you want to add to that.
Is there any thought you want to continue on, Nathaniel? You're already on a roll.
I'm already fired up. No, you go ahead and I'll ping pong.
Anything that surprised me along the way? Is that what you said?
Perspective.
That surprised me along the way. I think, like, overall, it's just kind of surprising, I guess. You know, it's kind of surprising how real and entrenched these systems of systemic racism are, and so proximal to us, and how I can go through, I don't know, 22 years of formal education and never learn about this very intimate and proximal historical perspective that still not only has a quote unquote legacy to this day, but that these people were still alive to this day. Unfortunately, or two of the people in the documentary have since passed since we made it. Rosemary has passed and Reverend has passed. And that just made it feel even the more special that we got to capture just a very small piece of their legacy before they passed away. But I think that was what was most surprising, was each time, you know, we would read something, or Nathaniel would find a piece of research and we'd look into it. What was surprising was just that it was all true. It was like, oh, well, let's go to the Register of Deeds and see if this is true. And then boom, oh, wow, this is true. This is very surprising that this is all this true and real. So I would say that was what was most surprising, in a way that it shouldn't be surprising, was, you know, each time it just kind of, the reality just kind of sunk in a little bit more each time we kind of explored the research.
I think something that stuck out to me was the bit about how the Black people moving into Santa Fe Place neighborhood were of a higher class economically than the white people who lived there. Like Nigo just said, like, maybe that shouldn't be surprising, but it certainly goes against like the racist stereotypes or the racial narrative that I've heard my whole life. And I think it's also really like interesting if you think about, so interrogating whiteness and the attitudes of the people who left, like, it really makes you wonder, like, not only were there narratives that they were consuming, like what Marquita was talking about in the film about fear and stereotypes and things, but you also wonder, like, did they leave because they couldn't stand to think that maybe those narratives were false? Like, by leaving the neighborhood, those white people were protecting their idea of the racist or the racial hierarchy. That was profound to me.
Dr. Glenn, looks like you have a question.
Take myself off mute. Yeah, thank you all for this. I found it really good. It's powerful to hear those voices. I'm glad you guys were able to speak to some of those folks who are obviously, near the end of their journeys. But one of the things that stuck out, I thought you did well in the Dividing Lines tour for Johnson Library, talked about how the dynamics of this continues in terms of school districts, and how families now, the fight over the various neighborhoods to live in is because, school funding is based on local property tax base. And that ensures that the richest neighborhoods have the best schools. So I wondered if you guys wanted to talk a little bit about more about that in terms of how this kind of forces a continuation of these very same racialized policies in a way. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
It's huge. I mean, I think one of the things that I get on a soapbox about with regards to schools, because you still see people leaving Kansas City, people who have the economic means to leave the city, who maybe have moved here when they were young and they have kids, their kids become schooling age, and then they leave to go to suburban schools that are better. But the way that we measure good and bad schools is related to test scores, which is has truly explicitly racist underpinnings. Our test scores, standardized testing goes back to eugenics movement, which was a pseudoscience used to try to create a scientific basis for the idea of racial hierarchy. And I think Ibram Kendi has talked about how those tests then they only capture certain types of or a certain idea of intelligence, but not necessarily the whole picture of what intelligence or achievement means. But then, all that gets pushed to the side when we talk about good and bad schools, just based on what are the scores, and it's not telling the whole story, and then it reinforces patterns of where people live based on the school district, and reinforce, and then it contributes to the valuation or devaluation of neighborhoods.
I would concur. Yeah, I don't want to drill too much on the point, but I would agree. It's Nathaniel and I have known each other for a very long time, so it's been really interesting for both of us to get to explore our own backgrounds. We actually went to high school together, and to just really kind of become aware of these things. Yeah, I would concur. I don't want to harp too much on that point, but.
So something that really stood out to me this time as I was watching it was, towards the end when Rodney Smith, Dr. Smith says, it's really these tacit, these sort of implicit, almost invisible ways that systemic racism, I mean, this kind of plays into what Dr. Glenn was just asking, and we often, act in our own financial interests. We want to go to the school that we're told is best. And, so how do we learn to see the ripple effect? I mean, where do we need to be paying attention in KC now? Do you, through your different projects, have you all kind of gotten to know like certain policies or things that are really, they're happening today that we need to know about?
Wow. I don't want to get too deep, but what I think I'm really trying to look at through my work is humanity, what it means to be human, what it means to be treated like your life matters. And we all have, I think what's interesting, what Nathaniel was pointing out was, he was contemplating the idea, like, was it the fragility of the white ego to say, if I'm challenged with this idea that, again, just in this binary discussion of the doc that we view, there's so many different interdisciplinary ways that we could look at this. So forgive me as I don't try to get into all of them, but this idea like, oh, these Black people who are actually well off and doing very well, and they're actually more economically stable than me and have better careers. My white fragility and ego can't handle that idea, so I'm gonna leave instead of, but my point there is that I think we all, myself included, we all have this ego, that the ego exists to protect us, and it's protected us for a very long time as a species. And I think that through that we've created different hierarchies, and one of the biggest things for me, even just in creating the work, right, is like trying to make sure that I'm not driven by my ego in creating the work, because I may just be perpetuating these same things. And this was a very big challenge I had creating it. And a very big challenge I had afterwards is that part of me feels like I am, by continuing to tell these narratives, by continuing to paint Black people through the lens of struggle, I am perpetuating the idea that Black people are struggling. And all of these things I think that are just, really big ego battles. So a big thing that I personally did to try to counteract that for myself was just spend a lot of time in the neighborhood. I spent probably 3 or 4 months in the neighborhood before we ever started filming anything, going to the neighborhood council meetings, and that led into somehow ending up at a lot of Sunday morning breakfasts and just being in the neighborhood for several months before ever trying to record anything, to try and make sure I was telling the most authentic story I could, that I was most proximal to it. And I think that process of, I guess, trying to close the proximity to whatever story, even because so many of these things are kind of often like preaching to the choir. So I'm trying to kind of think through the lens of like, and I'm sure a lot of people here, this isn't all entirely new information. Like, a lot of people probably have the same context or idea that, these things are horrible, right? For lack of a better word. So for me, like in the same position of I'm aware of these things, the biggest thing I try to do is just really create as much intimacy to whatever issue or concern I have, in a way to just kind of increasingly move my ego aside and what I think how something should go, or what I think the lesson to take from it, and just be in the experience for a while to then be able to use whatever gifts I have to create change. I think the ego is something that I've really been exploring, that I think protects all of us so much, that we then, as Dr. Rodney put, that it happens inexplicitly. It happens in a way where we think we're kind of just protecting ourselves, or it's the right thing to do, or it's, I'm not doing anything too wrong, but we're actually perpetuating these systems because what we're trying to do is just protect ourselves. And because all of that's built on an inequitable system, often protecting ourselves ends up, someone is severely taken advantage of in that case scenario.
I really want to commend you for that. I put this in the chat also, but that story and that lesson learned of being proximate, I think is really important and key for us as an academic health center, as we're working to ensure equity in the healthcare system and inclusion. It first starts with how do we better understand and stand shoulder to shoulder with the people we serve.
Yeah, that was something that was, I didn't realize. So I had the opportunity to go to grad school after my undergrad, and went right into like equity work and representation and recruiting students, and then got into philanthropy and then higher ed, and I didn't realize how kind of my quote unquote formal education was actually moving me further and further away from the spaces of intimacy and understanding, so that I could then have this professional knowledge to then quote unquote help people. When as I get older, I realize most people don't need help. They just need you to stop effing with them and let them live their peaceful lives. Sorry, that was this little rant, but
I started
and that we have the tools to be of value, but yeah, that was just kind of a rant. That was kind of my own frustration, and it was why I left what I would consider the institution. I used to just call the institution the overarching institution, and really got into filmmaking as a way to try and tell more authentic stories that didn't need to be protected so firmly by systems of privilege that we all find ourselves in right now. This is a very privileged space. We are all participating in systems of privilege to be here. Yeah, that's something that I consistently try to challenge myself on is the systems of privilege that I participate in, and how can I guess back to the ego thing, that's been really big for me lately, exploring that deeper and deeper and deeper, how can I put my ego aside and be fully present and understand and empathize, like really, really, really empathize with struggle in a way where my natural reactions of being a human being start to kick in, and not like my trained prefrontal cortex problem solving brain, but this, again, the point of humanity. That's really what I'm just really hopeful to keep growing towards over time.
Thank you. You have so many fans in the chat.
I don't know.
We really
I don't
appreciate
know. I feel like I'm ranting. I'm just
No.
ranting.
That's put so beautifully. Does anyone else have a question? I know Danielle in the chat earlier said we were having a conversation earlier or last week about the cycle of divestment, valuation, gentrification, school closures. And so it's kind of the which comes first, in racialized segregation. Is this sort of neighborhood divestment the new segregation?
I think segregation is the new segregation. We just keep seeing more of the same. Our schools are more segregated than they were in the 80s. I think the TIF financing is the new redlining, and it's used in a theoretically benevolent way, but not. Well, I don't know. It's not even theoretically benevolent. It like the idea is benevolent. Like, oh, let's create incentives to drive development where disinvestment has laid waste. But instead, it's just a neoliberal. Let's race to the bottom and lure business here, it's not helping.
There's certainly a vehicle for, or can be a vehicle for, gentrification. We had a really great discussion on that last week with our eyes towards South Kansas City, right? And we don't have to talk about that deeply here, but we were just talking about how this is still happening around us, and how do we kind of take the scales off of our eyes to say, in our own neighborhood and neighborhoods that we're proximate to, what are the signs in that cycle that this is currently happening where we exist?
Right, yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Like what, just to kind of have a little bit stronger context, like what is the most intimate aspect of this space that we're all in right now? Like what really binds everyone here together around a conversation like this? I would love to kind of just hear from folks to create a little more intimacy in this space. You could share your personal experience. You could share how you found yourself on your professional journey. You could, share why this is important.
So I'm Jill Peltzer. I'm in the School of Nursing, and I have been a nurse since 1992. And I think as a nurse, what you said about what it means to be human is, I think, central to the work that I do as a nurse, and what is the space that we create for individuals to find meaning in suffering, because so often we're working with individuals who come into the health system because they're sick and they're suffering. And so as well, trying to understand the root causes of health inequities, and as a nurse, what is our role in helping to change the healthcare system, to change nursing. Nursing was created as part of a racist structure. And so how do we continue to contribute to that and how nursing is today? So that's what brings me here, is to find a better way to be a nurse and to teach nursing students to be nurses.
Mm. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you for bringing us to that place, Nico. That's great. If anyone else wants to share, I do want to acknowledge that we have just 2 minutes left until 1 o'clock. I'm happy to stay for a few minutes if others can, but I know if anyone needs to leave. But who would like to address that question next?
Nico, this is Kimberly Conley, and I'm the Senior International Officer and the Director of the Office of International Programs. So my job brings me intimately into the lives of many people from many diverse countries, cultures. And I'm very fortunate to have those opportunities for interaction and learning of culture. I would say I've been drawn to this particular space. We created community conversations about 3 years ago. Christina, I think we've been going about 3 years, so that we could just, know more, understand more. As a white Irish Catholic woman raised in Kansas City, I felt like I knew something about structural racism, but I didn't have the verbiage, and I really didn't have the education. And I'm married to a Black man, and we have children of color. They're multi-ethnic, ranging from Pacific Islander to Black Hispanic. And so for me, it became very personal. And I realized through this journey, I've realized, to your point about ego, how much my ego comes into play. And this, as I kind of look through my own lens and try to understand, but realize how much I don't understand. And especially being in an intimate relationship with a Black man, I realized for how ignorant I've been, and how many ignorant, just how my ignorance can impact our relationship. So for me, this is very personal, very important. And the education, as someone, especially what you offer, you and Nathaniel have offered about Kansas City, very, very, very interesting and very educational for me. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. That was what I was super excited about, just to be able to bring such a proximal and intimate story to Kansas City in a way where it could, be used like this. It's been used in so many ways to really ground us in our city, in a way that's not a distant or national or far off, or this happened somewhere there. And it wasn't the same, JC Nichols story we've all heard a million times now. So it was really important to create a story that folks can drive to. We were talking about trying to do a 27th Street tour I don't know if any of you have traveled east and west on 27th Street, but if, just in your own time, I would do it. It's you could walk it to maybe 2.5 miles, and it's fascinating. It's very, very fascinating.
Count us in.
Okay. From what's that Crown Center right there to, I think we went to maybe the grocery. No, the grocery was on 31st. Can't remember what we went to on the east side. 27th. Probably, two, you know what it was? It was to Santa Fe, and then you take a right on Benton and go walk through the neighborhood. And we were initially trying to hold a screening at that retirement home there. Are you all familiar with the retirement home on 27th and Benton, I believe it is, which used to be a school. It used to be Benton Elementary School. And it was obviously an all-white school at the time. And when Black families started moving in, white families bombed that school, and they had to shut the school down for like 3 weeks until no one could go to the school. And whenever the school was able to finally reopen, they had resegregated the school. Another really fascinating story about that neighborhood that didn't make it. There were so many parts of the story we wanted to include that just didn't make it. But I would encourage anyone to take the walk if you feel safe.
That's truly horrific. I just want to jump in and say that I think there are a lot of white people that don't even know about the school, the neighborhood. It's like the classic whitewashing of history. There's just not even any knowledge or awareness that it's there. So I'm adding this to the list of things that I'm just going to randomly ask friends and family. Have you heard of the Santa Fe neighborhood? Have you heard of the Benton School? And just kind of prompt people to think about, maybe there are parts of history that they're just totally unaware of. I really want to applaud you. I have watched this documentary several times, and every time I get chills and just want to know more, and I just really appreciate it.
Thank you for caring. It's something that I've really struggled with afterwards, and I really took a step back because, like I mentioned earlier, painting as storytellers, and all of us are storytellers in our own right, we have a responsibility for the stories that we perpetuate. And so it was really hard for me, honestly, to see the work and have the work recognized, because it felt very daunting, like I'm perpetuating these narratives of oppression versus the importance of educating and what you're describing, Dan, of just like really like educating. And I'm now back to the side of it is very important to educate. And once there is an adequate amount of education around issues, we all have a collective responsibility to decide where we go from there. But without bringing these things up, without education, then we are just whitewashing this history. And so, but thank you. I genuinely appreciate the support of the work.
I think that journey of re-education, and especially for white people, because I can skate through life, and if I chose to only surround myself with white people, only read books written by white male authors and movies by white male producers, and get a totally falsified history of the country that said it's a meritocracy, a benevolent meritocracy, greatest country in the world. And I think it takes active intentionality to forever, for the rest of my life, be unraveling the lies that I've been told, the lies that I hold on to that I don't realize. I think it's a everlasting journey to do.
That's the ego work. That's the ego work. And for me, what I've realized is because, the ego exists to protect us. And it did a really good job. We've evolved quite well as a species. We are sitting very well firmly atop of the food chain at this point. But now, we've kind of run away with it. And from just like, I try to look at it from that base point of view, like it's not necessarily to protect the systems of privilege I have. That of course is the case, but even more, foundational than that, it just simply is there to protect me. And our rationale, our line of thinking, how we make sense of the world, how we believe ourselves to exist in the world, is when our ego kicks in. And just challenging that very notion, challenging the very notion is frightening. Challenging anything that you've believed so long you don't remember not believing it. I was having actually a conversation with the friend who's an early educator about school starting up and some things that they're doing. And she was talking about, teaching kids numbers and how numbers actually mean something and they add up. And it like reminded me, it's like, oh, there was a time when I had to figure out what a 4 even looked like. Okay, this is a 4, and then what 4 plus, all of this is constructed knowledge. And we get to a point in our lives where we forget this was knowledge we were taught and constructed. And that's the same case with all of these things that we're discussing here. And so when you start to pull those apart, it's like if someone told you, no, 4 plus 2 actually aren't even numbers, that doesn't make sense. You tell them, no, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. This is my truth. This is what I know. And that's really the comparisons I started to draw it to, is like trying to exist in the space of a child again, to say, I'm willing to learn new information. I'm willing to learn a new way of living and being and existing. At least trying, at least trying.
Quick
Thanks.
shameless plug, we're going to be talking about the geography of the U.S. on the 23rd for Hispanic and Latinx Month, and the forgotten and epic history of Hispanic and Latinx peoples. So just always challenging these narratives of the way we see our world and our country, and bringing more facts to light.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear anyone else who has found themselves in this intimate space here together that we share.
I want you to come back and bring us all together all the time.
I'll share.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
I can share.
Thanks.
So we moved from rural Iowa, where I graduated from in high school, I graduated with 50 people, and there were 0 Black people in our our K-12 community, 0. There was actually, of any other race, there were only 2 adopted kids from South Korea. And so it was just so incredibly homogenous. I mean, just really only one, kind of one way of looking at the world. And we actually moved after college. We moved to Kansas City and lived in Midtown for 12 years. And it was a really intentional choice to branch out of our community that we had come from, and really land ourselves in a space where we would be challenged and kind of begin to understand other communities in the same way that we started to be challenged while we were in college. And that was it was just really powerful for me to live around people and just even experience the world through other people's eyes, through our neighbors, through, riding the bus in the city and all of that. So this has just been, for me, this has just been another continuation of that personal journey. I'm so glad that, as a medical center, that we can have these discussions, because it impacts our profession. And then for me personally, it lands really closely from the 12 years that we did live in the city. And it was just so important to us that our kids were in really, actually, truly diverse schools, and just the experience that they had that changed kind of their perspective. So yeah, I really, really appreciate your work on this. It's a really important message, I think, especially for people who have a background like mine, where you just don't, as you're growing up, you have no context for other perspectives at all. Like, there's no opportunity unless you travel or whatever.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, Stephanie?
Yeah.
So I think so something that I remember, one of the first documentaries I produced, we were interviewing this wonderful Black woman who's a civil rights leader. And at the end of the interview, like, me looking like this, I asked her, hey, like, you've told this story about racism, what can I do to fix it? And her very succinct answer is like, hey, I've survived racism, like, throughout my life. I know how to proceed. I know how to go forward. You need to figure out what racism is costing you, so that you can then be invested in the struggle. So I'm curious, like, having gone from, sorry, I had a fly in my face, having gone from an environment where it was completely homogenous, what stood out? Like, were there things that were like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I was missing out on X? Like what did you, can you reflect on the cost?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, right? But I just think the value of seeing the world through another person's eyes is just like, that's the biggest thing. Like, when you all come from the same background, of course, everyone has a slightly different experience. I had kids in my class who, whose parents were divorced, and other people who lived, like, I mean, there's some variety, but you miss out on the, I think my favorite positive experience that just comes to mind as you ask that question is the back to school barbecue that we did every year, and Battery Tour came and did the music, and just this like amazing, fun community of dancing and like totally being like embodied in a way that farming Iowa community people do not become embodied in their bodies like that, like, and just some of our really good friends run a drill team, and they own it, and they came with their drum line, and just like the dancing and the music and all of these things that just were not remotely part of my upbringing. And especially, it's not just for me, and then also watching my kids figure out, because we don't model it very well either. Like, turns out I'm white, I don't model that well. and to have our kids have friends who are kind of pulling them out of their shell in a way that they wouldn't necessarily be if we were in an all-white community. Like, it's just there's so much beauty there that I just missed out on growing up in a homogenous community.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sure. I'm just trying to continually increase my awareness and find very subtle, small moments to empathize. I forget who said it. When they're talking about nursing, but essentially, please correct me if I'm remembering this wrong, but like nursing is finding, or like the medical field is like finding meaning in the struggle and the pain, as people come there for pain. And I try to apply that whole idea to life, in and of itself, like, finding like meaning in it, and what are we to really gather from it. And the more I try and do that, it like brings me more and more to the moment, to the present, and just being present with people and hearing people. And I think, I realize the more I practice that, how I may have like 10 thoughts or ideas about what someone is saying to me before I'm even registering that I'm listening to what they're saying, and just how those triggers go off so fast that we don't even realize it. And it takes a consistent practice of stillness and to just quiet those preconditioned responses and beliefs, to just be present with someone and hear them, and to present, and to have no agenda, or no like, I'm gonna try and fix this or understand this, or I'm listening so that I can be a better human, or or whatever agenda we have for trying to be present with people, and just being present, and then seeing like what arises from that. Because this is such a small, slender example of a human issue that we're all trying to get better and better at understanding. And this was really harnessed and focused on. It was mentioned extremely briefly, but the big reason why this documentary was created was for the tax policy opportunity zones. And so the idea that we were really presenting here was, in order to understand the risk of this real estate policy, let's look at how real estate policies have unfolded in the past. But it's, I can recognize, and what's been so hard for me is, even in telling this story, I realized that we're holding up a bias in telling this story, that someone else is the victim of, and in very direct ways when I've thought about it, but just in indirect ways, because that is the truth of it. Like, we all exist in situations of advantage and disadvantage. And so even in the telling of this story and how we told it and who we're telling it about, someone else could just as easily be being disadvantaged by it. And I know, like, that's the unfortunate kind of crazy world we live in now, where like everyone kind of wants to kind of like, you can't fight every battle, you just can't. There's just so many battles. But I just want to acknowledge that and give space to that even in telling this story, I recognize that we have probably either perpetuated or ignored an equally just as powerful and important story. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of give space to that.
Thank you, Nico. This is so great. I think many of us feel that pressure too, when we choose to bring forward a topic to discuss, that we need to justify all of this is important too. But just to give this space. I mean, it's okay to just be confidently giving this topic space because this is important. And so many times it will get diluted, right? Especially, specifically racism will get diluted when you want to just bring in every other, form of oppression, which are very valuable, but it's easy to dilute that. And so that's why we hold this space here to talk about this. And I think, personally myself, I get all my fragility in here. I get, nervous public speaking, all these things that happen. And so it's hard to just remember to just be present because we're really just trying to share this human space, like you said, and, share our experiences. And so definitely appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for giving it back to me.
Mm-hmm.
I try to. That's something I'm working on, is just like not justifying, like holding space for the things, like giving things the proper space. It's like, if this is a space for this, we could acknowledge there are many, many, many more important, equally important things, but let's just hold it for this. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do. It was fascinating, just going to the community meetings and spending time there. There was this big discussion unfolded one day in a community meeting where they were trying to turn a couple empty lots into a park. And you had newer families with young children, and they wanted to build a park in their neighborhood. And the older family members were very cautious because they said, if you build a park, that gives people to hang out and riffraff and trouble happens and then violence will unfold. And something so simple as a park, and what a park is supposed to mean for people in a neighborhood because of the trauma that's been inflicted creates such vast differences. Those moments were so just grounding for me to realize, to realize like those are the everyday battles unfolding that, even just trying to get a swing, putting your on the corner, triggers, so much trauma. I just wanted to kind of share that one reflection that came to mind whenever being at these community meetings. What stamina are you referring to, Nathaniel?
Oh, I was just thinking about what Christina
Yeah.
was saying.
I know.
This seems like it's a good place to practice your, especially white people's stamina for talking about difficult, triggering, traumatic, white supremacy, hard conversations.
Yeah, that's what we try to do. That's what we're trying to do.
I have to say, she's just super humble though. Like, she does such a good job, like every time. Very good at word choice. So I think she's demonstrating some humility too.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Well, thanks everyone for staying 20 minutes to hear. This was really, you all are making me feel like younger people are amazing. like just your emotional intelligence at your age. I'm just guessing you're a lot younger than I am, that I am just now starting to even dig into. So I'm really excited about.
Well, I'm 30 for what it's worth.
All right.
Throw that out there. I think we're both 30. Are you 30, Nathaniel? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm 30.
Well,
I'm 30.
10 years ahead of you, but
Young
you're
ducks.
30.
Keep it coming. We love what you're
Right.
doing.
Oh. Well, thank you. Does anyone, I just thank you. Just thank you so much. And thank you all for sticking around and talking and sharing. And please come back the second Tuesday of the month. We'll be here.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Yeah,
Nice
thanks for
to
having
meet
us.
you.